Hey everyone, Dr. Robin Bond here. Today I want to talk to you about the process of doing science, which in elementary school or high school or whatever you probably heard of as the scientific method. So let's talk about the basic structure, which might be similar to what you've heard about in school. Science is a way of figuring things out. It's a way of solving problems. So the first thing you need is a problem. Now, in many cases, that problem is a question, like, I want to understand why this works and I can't understand it. Okay, so that's the first part, figuring out what you want to know. So a lot of people think that when you have a question you want answered, the first thing a scientist does is to go in and do an experiment, right? That's not actually true, because the first thing we actually do is we go and we do research. We look at books, or in the case of professional scientists, what we look at are what we call peer-reviewed journal articles, which are basically, you can think about as a magazine article where that article has not just been written by someone, but has actually been checked by other scientists to see if it is factually okay. So that's where we start. We start by figuring out what the scientific community as a whole already knows. And we're going to use that to build our ideas of what could possibly be happening. The next thing we usually do is to form a hypothesis. So, two things about forming a hypothesis. First of all, what is a hypothesis? A hypothesis is an educated guess, not just a random guess. We don't just say, well, there are 5 possible things and eeny, meeny, miny, mo, I'm going to pick thing 3. We don't do that. It's a guess that's based on that research that we just did. The second thing is, you might have noticed that I said we usually form a hypothesis. Sometimes we really have no idea. In order to make an educated guess, we need to be educated. And there are sometimes science is going so far outside the realm of what we know, we're just kind of shooting in the dark, and we can't really do hypothesis-based science. We can do guess-based science, but a hypothesis is not a straight-out guess. Okay, so that's step 3, forming a hypothesis. Now the next thing we do is we set up an experiment. And there are a lot of things you have to do to set up a good experiment. That would be a whole different video, probably multiple videos, to be honest. We set up an experiment and we collect data. So most people, when I say collect data, they immediately think numbers, Robin's writing down numbers. You have probably seen me writing down numbers in at least one of my other videos. And it's true, numbers are great, but they are not the only data. Any sort of observation is data. I tell my chemistry students, if something changes color, a lot of times you're not measuring that with a number, although we can, but a lot of times you're just looking and you say, oh, it turned pink. That's an observation. We write it down. It's data. We then take that data and we analyze it. There is an art to data analysis, because it's not just what could it mean, it's how do we know which of those things that it could mean is true. So, like I said, there's an art to doing that. It's something that you have to work on very hard, and it's one of those things, if you saw my video earlier about what kind of scientist do you want to become, mastering data analysis is pretty much the hardest part of becoming a master scientist. Okay, and then this is where your textbook or whatever stops and says, then you draw a conclusion. Okay, that's true. You can look at your data and you could say, this is what my data is telling me, the end. Scientists don't work like that. And there are many reasons for that. One is, a lot of times you'll look at your data and you say, I might know what this means, but in order to be sure, I need more data. So then you go back to stage 4 of doing another experiment and analyzing that data again. So your conclusion might be, I need to do more experiments. The other thing is that you'll find that, let's say you wanted to answer a question. A lot of times your conclusion is, well, I only sort of kind of answered that question. And while I was sort of kind of answering that question, I discovered that I have 5 new questions about what's going on. So science is not a process where you just go through these steps and then you stop. Science goes on forever. You're always uncovering more and more and more information. And the more information you uncover, the more information you realize you have yet to learn. So what I like to say is, in the process of getting my PhD, I learned a lot, but what I learned most of all was I hardly know anything at all. And that is part of science, understanding how little we know about the universe. So if you meet someone who thinks they understand everything, they are probably not a scientist. The final part is to report your science. Okay, and there are many ways you can do this. You can do this at a conference where you're speaking in front of people. You can present it as a poster. So if you do science fair at your middle school or whatever, you make your little posters. We still do that as adult professional scientists. We do a lot of poster presentations. Our posters are not made of construction paper stuck onto a trifold board. They look a little nicer, but we still do posters. And the most important way is something that I referred to earlier. It's a peer-reviewed journal article. And a peer-reviewed journal article carries the most weight of any sort of scientific report. If you do a poster presentation or a conference presentation, you and your coworkers alone are the ones who decide what goes in there and what you tell people. But if you have a peer-reviewed journal article, what you've done is you've sent your report essentially to other scientists who know something about the field that you're working in. So probably no one knows exactly what you do, but they could be related. Okay, so the people who reviewed my peer-reviewed papers on ocean chemistry have studied similar aspects of ocean chemistry, for example. So they're not completely clueless. They look at it, they understand, and they can look at the data, they can see how I analyze the data, and they can see the conclusions I drew from that data, and they can say, well, you know, I kind of understand why you might think this, but isn't it also true that this might be happening? Did you think about this other thing? And so what this process of peer review does is it helps you to make your science better by having an outside person come in and look and see the things that you might have missed. In the final part of your report, your journal article, there's a paragraph where you talk about future work, where you say, as I was answering this question, here are all the other questions that came up. Someone should look at these questions in the future. Those questions can then be answered by other people, and this process starts all over again. Like I said, this is not a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and you're done kind of process. It is a non-stop process. Well, I hope you enjoyed learning about the process of science. I've got a lot of great content coming up soon, including next Saturday, a video for people who would like to be scientists but think they aren't smart enough. In the meantime, subscribe to my channel and also hit that like button. See you next week.